Okay, so I won't be long. So I just want to say hello and to welcome Kaushik Basu and to welcome all of you to this conference. So Kaushik will talk. He's a chief economist of the World Bank. Will be introduced by François Bourguignon, who will say a few words about Kaushik, and we'll do that right away. So thank you.
Thank you very much, and welcome everybody. So I have this daunting task to introduce Kaushik Basu to this audience. And I must say that I'm very happy to do it, but at the same time I'm very frustrated because if I really wanted to make justice to all what Kaushik has done and all what he has written, then I'm afraid that he would not have time to speak today. So I will be brief as like Pierre-Yves, but maybe a little less brief than Pierre-Yves. Now, a few words about his itinerary, and then a few words about his amazing production. About his itinerary, you have seen that he is today the chief economist of the World Bank. As a matter of fact, he is there not for very long, because he will be leaving the bank next September, going back to academia, going back to Cornell University, because he has been on leave for 7 years from Cornell. Before going to the World Bank, he was the chief economic advisor with the finance minister in India. He has done that for 3 years, and this is the reason why he left his position for a while in Cornell. Prior to Cornell, he was an academic in India in the Delhi School of Economics. There is a Paris School of Economics, there is a London School of Economics. Kaushik has been at least in 2 of those School of Economics. He was in the Delhi School, and he created in the Delhi School the Center for Economic Development. And he was the first director of that center, which is quite well known. And prior to that, he was, as many Indian economists, in the UK, and he was in the London School of Economics. This is where he got his PhD, and he got his PhD under the supervision of Amartya Sen. So this is really a great trajectory, and Kaushik was telling me that he was indeed very happy to go back to academia. And this is really where he believes that he belongs. So a few words now about his production, which is quite amazing for at least 3 reasons. I mean, first, it is huge, many books, many articles. Second, it is deep. It is not an article on a tiny detail, a tiny point in some theory. In general, it is really on fundamental issues. And finally, it is extremely diverse. And let me give you some example of that, some example of the diversity. I think it started very much in welfare economics, I think very much influenced by Amartya Sen, I guess. Then it's done a lot in game theory. And you may have heard about the traveler's game, which is Kaushik's invention, but he has done a lot of things in this area. As many game theorists, he also went to industrial organization. He has done work on law and economics. He has done this very, very important work on the issue of child labor. And he has a very, very important paper published in this area, which influenced very, very much the thinking of the profession about this issue of child labor. In particular, what was the point and what were the benefits and the cost of banning products which were using child labor. This was really a very, very important piece of work. He has done work on the collective model of the household. And lately he has done work on central banking. and monetary policy, the optimal exchange rate policies, and I guess this is really what he had to do when he was advising the finance minister in India. So it is really quite amazing to see that he touched upon all these issues, all these topics, and every time again with a very, very deep contribution. So I think I could go on with his work. I should say that I've known Kaushik not for 30 or 35 years. I mean, the first time I heard about him was with a book that he published in, I checked the date, 1984, so it's not yesterday. This book was called The Less Developed Economy, Critique of the Contemporary Theory. And when I read this book, I was absolutely surprised by the depth of the thinking behind that, by the kind of maturity there was already in those days about the way in which you could think about development. And one constant also, I believe, in Kaushik's work is the fact that India is always somewhere in his mind, somewhere in his work. And of course, for anybody working on development, India is, of course, the most exciting area for study. So let me simply finish by insisting on the last point on Kaushik, which I really like. And to do that, I had to take some notes. And so I have to put my glasses. Kaushik is among those people who have a talent to find fantastic titles for articles. So let me read you some of the titles that I took in the list of publication. One, which is interesting, is a marketing scheme for making money off innocent people. A user's manual. Another one was The Broth and the Cooks, a theory of labor surplus. Another one, How Sapient is Homo economicus. And this one, you will never believe it, and it is the title of a paper which is a recent paper, and the title is A New and Very Long Proof of the Pythagoras Theorem, by way of a proposition on isosceles triangles. So this shows that you may be a fantastic economist, but you may be at the same time a very talented amateur geometrician. Kaushik, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, François. Thank you also for the invitation. It's a pleasure for me to be back here. I should tell you that with François, he gave our background. For me, first of all, it's a bit disorienting seeing him in person for one reason, is I do the job now what he used to do earlier, and my conference room has pictures of the previous 9 chief economists. So a lot of my time I spend sitting under a picture of François Bourguignon over there. So seeing him in person is a bit of a disorientation of two kinds of interaction. I'm also thankful for the opportunity to come here. I've been to this area, but before the existence of the Paris School. Very memorable visit for me. In the time when I used to work on the collective household decision-making model, once again, actually, that is something that I took the lead of François' work, and I had got into that area, and for a longish time, I had a lot of interest in that. What I'm going to do today is not quite a paper. This is an area in which the World Bank has taken a lot of interest. I have played a role in pushing the World Bank to take an interest in this area. So I am going to give you scattered pieces of work broadly in the area of behavioral economics, social economics, and the interaction of this with development. So sort of drawing on the World Bank research and a little bit of my own research related to this. To begin, as François just mentioned, I went to India as the advisor to the Indian government. And for me, that was a very, very sudden move from complete academic life to complete hands-on policy work in government. And a lot of our time in the Indian government would be spent among the economists talking of technical matters. So to get the country growing, what is the correct fiscal policy? What is the correct monetary policy? What should the call money rate be between the central bank and other banks? Tariff rates, standard topics of economics would be discussed. It seems to me, however, that if you are beginning to talk in terms of why does a country grow and develop, one country, and why another country does not grow and develop, these things are important. In the short run, these things are probably more important than anything else. But in the medium term, in the long term, the social, cultural, behavioral, psychological roots of society are extremely important. To me, it is a very, very big neglect that we've paid so little attention to these foundations. Actually, it's not so true anymore. As you know, over the last 10 years, 20 years, there has been a lot of work, especially the interface between psychology and economics has come into prominence. But still, there is a belief that get these fundamentals of economic policy right, fiscal policy, monetary policy, trade policy, and that's it. And we have very often, from the World Bank, from the IMF, we've gone to developing countries, to South Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, parts of Latin America, completely insensitive to the social situation you're going to. You take a couple of very standard policy recommendations, bring down the tariff rate, do this to your fiscal policy, and everything will work. Not realizing that some of these things, depending on the context, it could work, it need not work at all. So the Washington consensus that these rules of economics are enough is not really true, because you do need some social, psychological foundations before these economic policies can gain traction. I've believed in this for a longish time, and doing hands-on policy, I became even more sensitive to that. So when I joined the World Bank in 2012, we were beginning to discuss what should be the topic for the next World Development Report. And I felt the World Bank being very influential in the area of development, to get a World Development Report that recognizes the importance of this would be a worthwhile venture. So after some discussion, luckily the procedure for these things is not too long. It is the chief economist with the president of the World Bank. You sit, you discuss with colleagues, you take a decision. I pushed very hard for a World Development Report on mind, society, and behavior. We had two very good people to lead this project, one of them with whom I've had a long-standing friendship, known her, Carla Hoff and Varun Gauri. So both of them came on board to lead of this World Development Report. This was, for me, as the report was emerging, very good perception of how economists relate to a topic of this kind. First of all, there was an immediate reaction, knee-jerk reaction, that this is not what economists should be doing. For a variety of reasons, this is not mainstream economics. Number two, as soon as you talk of people's preferences, psychology, there is an element of paternalism involved, that you are trying to influence people's thought and how people choose. To that, my reaction was, paternalism is already being used, most importantly by the private sector. When you try to give loan to a person, you use a lot of psychology. When you try to sell a product to people, you use a lot of psychology. There is a lot of evidence now that in some stores in America, when you are going into a store, let us say to buy a refrigerator, you are entering the store, right at the doorstep, you will get a very expensive, fantastic refrigerator. You will think whether you would buy it, and you'll reach the conclusion it's so expensive, it's not worth it. Now, it is known that this refrigerator, the store knows the store will never sell this refrigerator. But the encounter with this at the entrance will change your price referencing in your head. After that, when you go in and see another refrigerator a bit cheaper, with virtually the same facilities, you are more likely to buy that. Your framing has got changed by the entry into the store. Stores use that. It is believed that after the subprime crisis in the United States, when some people were not following the contracts at all, they wrote on to mortgage contracts where they did not understand and they defaulted. There were other finance people who were collecting lists of people who had signed on to bad contracts, so that you know people whom you can sell another round of bad contracts to. These are techniques that are used. Not always. Fortunately, the modern economy would not function, but it happens. A recent book, I've just written a very long paper on Akerlof and Schiller's book, Fishing for Fools, gives a whole catalog of this kind of things that is done by the private sector. Politicians, when they run for office electorally, they use a whole lot of psychological strategies. My point was, if it is being used by so many such people, why shouldn't we use it in development? And at least put it on the table. Yes, there is an element of paternalism when you're trying to influence people's thinking. But once you've learned how to influence another person, not to influence also is a decision. So once you know how to influence, you can't escape that. If you don't, you're taking a decision. You're prompting people to do something. So at least it should be put on the table. This is what the development agenda is. This is the way you're getting engaged in. So this was the discussion. The report was done. The report was actually one of our most successful reports. And a lot of the tribute does go to the two people who led it, because after the initial choice of the topic, I had very little to do with it. Carla Hoff, who had done some of these very interesting works earlier, one of them, I'm breaking up my sequence a little bit, but I must tell you, this is again the history of the choice of the World Development Report. Carla Hoff had done this study, some of you will know this, in India, where you make school children take IQ kind of tests. First, you put the school children in a room like this, read out don't give out their caste identities. They are all pooled together. You don't know who is of what caste. If you bring the children from different villages, they won't know one another's caste. You sit down, no discussion of caste. You make them take these IQ tests. They perform more or less the same. Then you do another round of experiment, bring them into the room. When you read out their name, with their name, you also read out the caste. One thing I should tell you, in India, there's nothing politically incorrect about reading out the caste name. So it's not that it's a social jolt to suddenly have your caste be announced. In cities it will be. Don't go into a city and shake hands with people by mentioning their caste. That will be a bit odd. But in villages, it's a done thing. Good or bad, it's a done thing. But the fact that that can have a psychological impact on the person taking the test, I would not have predicted. Their tests show that after you announce the caste, the backward caste children's performance just drops. That announcement makes a difference. What difference it makes? I have some difference of opinion with Carla about what causes it. If I have time, I'll come back to this. These are the kinds of studies which to me were important, and I think we should invest in it. With that, we entered right into this. So let me tell you roughly the agenda that I will go through. So this was, I should warn you, this was pre-agenda talk, so it's going to be a longish talk. So these are the three topics. The WDR, I've already told you about it, social norms and human behavior. I don't want you to read this, so let me go back. So, yeah. I'm going to now start with something that got me interested a long time ago. So this has made an appearance in my book, but I must tell you, it's a somewhat frivolous story, but important enough. Trade and exchange is the basis of modern human society. Just imagine if there was no exchange and trade, you had to make your own food, your own clothing, your own housing. We would be abysmally poor people. We'd be so inefficient trying to provide everything for ourselves. It would be extremely inefficient world. The modern world is made possible by exchange. I do nothing else but do economics. I don't make my clothes, I don't grow my food, I don't make houses. I do economics, I sell that and buy other things from others. That's what modern society is. What leads to trade and exchange? Open up a textbook of microeconomics. It's tell you that three assumptions you need. The first assumption is indifference curves move up, meaning you prefer more goods to less goods. We are on the whole greedy. We want more rather than less. Indifference curves go up. Number two, indifference curves have to have a convex shape, which is not exactly the same thing, but virtually the same as the law of diminishing marginal utility, which says that if you have more and more of one good, your taste for that good will go down. You'll get less utility out of that. The original work on the law of diminishing marginal utility, very interestingly, goes back to 1748 to Daniel Bernoulli had discovered the law of diminishing marginal utility. Later on, there would be Stanley Jevons, Hermann Heinrich Gossen, and all would come in. Two assumptions: more preferred to less, law of diminishing marginal utility. With these, a third assumption, that if the initial endowment is different, I have all the butter, someone else has all the bread. So one country has all the iron ore, another country has all the food. So these three assumptions will lead to trade and exchange. I'm putting down these three assumptions just now, formally for you. The first assumption, textbook will tell you, more individuals prefer more to less. Second assumption, law of diminishing marginal utility. If you have too much of one, you don't care for that. And the third assumption is, if to start with, someone has all of one and the other person have all of something else, these three will lead to trade, barter, exchange. If you've done the Edgeworth-Bowley box analysis, this is basically the start of that. This leads to trade. There were experiments done. These experiments were not being done to demonstrate anything about this claim, but I sort of put them together. There was an experiment done in 1975 in Texas with rats, and they discovered that rats prefer more. First of all, more to less, that's taken for granted. They're always looking around for more food. But the rats satisfy the law of diminishing marginal utility. As they have more and more of one good, they are going to make a less of an effort to get to that good. These were very sophisticated experiments. I've forgotten the details, but it's something like this. You put a hurdle for a rat, which has to jump over to get to a piece of cheese. After it eats the cheese, bring it back, put the hurdle back up again. Unless you lower the hurdle a little bit, the rat won't go for the second piece because it's satisfied. So you have to keep lowering the cost for the second and the third piece to get the rat to go. This was not the experiment, but something like this, which showed that four authors did it. Rats satisfy the law of diminishing marginal utility. So the first and the second were done in experiments, you'd know that. The third is very easy to do, and there was a separate experiment done. This is reported by Carl Wernerid, a Swedish economist, that some economists wanted to test whether rats do trade and exchange or not. So what they did was they held one rat, gave this rat a lot of bread, another rat over there, gave that rat a lot of cheese, and the experimenters wanted to see whether there will be trade or not. And the study showed that there is no trade. I would not have done the test, but economists like to do tests of everything, so there is no trade. Rats satisfy the first two conditions. The third one you can engineer, give all to one and to the other, but there is no trade and exchange. They rush and try to grab the other person's food, it becomes a mess. Clearly, apart from these three assumptions, there are other things which we assume, which we don't write down in our textbooks. Basic norms, respecting another person is important. Language, to be able to talk and say, I'll give you one packet of cheese, how much bread will you give me? Language is important. So if you write down the social assumptions underneath this, which we take for granted, there are many. Once you're alerted to this, you realize that in life, there are many conditions which we take for granted and we write down, and then we work with economic assumptions, and we miss out on the fact that some societies have done well and others have done poorly, maybe very little to do with economics, but a lot to do with these prior assumptions. Another one, which has got a lot of prominence because of the work of Francis Fukuyama, is the importance of trust. In a society in which there is a lot of anonymous trust, that society functions better. And in a society where you don't have anonymous trust, that society functions worse in terms of the economy. In India, there is a lot of trust among friends and relatives. Anonymous trust is low. If you don't know another person, you don't trust that person. In Scandinavian countries, in Japan, anonymous trust is very high. And the belief is that that helps, and you can see that very easily. In life, how many contracts can you write down formally and have it legally enforced? We are continuously doing little trades where there is a gap between my side and your side. I come and paint your house, 7 days later you pay me. If there isn't trust, these transactions tend to break down, and once you think hard, the scope for transaction breaking down is huge. François was giving you titles of my books, but one of my papers, I must give you one more title, which I'm very proud of. This is very early in my life. It's my shortest paper with the longest title, and the title is Why We Do Not Try to Walk Away Without Paying After a Taxi Ride. And I wrote this paper because when I was a college student in Delhi, some of my friends took a taxi ride to the heart of Delhi, and when the taxi stopped at the traffic light, they opened the door and ran away without paying. And they found it's very easy to do that, and once you think of it, it is actually not hard at all to run away after a taxi ride without paying. Why don't we do that? And I wanted to argue that for a minimal reason is we do have social values, we do have norms which are internalized in us. And that's why society is made possible. You know, in the olden days, and I feel it is really a bit of a shame that in economics this would happen. If you say, why don't we pick pockets, other people's pocket, why don't we take their wallet out in a bus when we travel and run? Economists would give you the economistic answer, which is rational. Well, if you pick another person's pocket, yes, there may be $100, $200, but there is a probability you'll be caught. If you get caught, you'll be punished. That cost may be $200. For that reason, we don't steal other people's wallets. Think once, taking off your economist hat, is that really the reason? If that was the reason, I would feel very uncomfortable traveling in a bus. If you thought everyone is calculating about how to pinch my pocket and the cost-benefit analysis, whether to try to steal my wallet or not, they don't do that. People are pre-programmed about things, are differently pre-programmed depending on the society you've come from. As I'm entering into this topic, one important thing I want to tell you. At one level, this is a politically incorrect topic. So people don't even talk about this because, yes, there are cultural differences. One reason I feel very comfortable talking about this is because of a belief of mine that we human beings are fundamentally very, very similar. Across race, across religion, across caste, we are similar, and it's not very surprising because we come from the same genetic roots. You don't have to go very far. Most of our differences that we show in our behavior are responses to your immediate history, the society you're living in. You've developed certain traits to live with that society. So a lot of these differences, I believe virtually all these cultural differences are relatively responses to the society you live in, the recent history that you've had, that's got programmed into you. I don't think these have genetic roots, and we should openly discuss this and look at what is good, what is bad, and get into this. Okay, I want to get into this topic with 3 things from the World Development Report, one which was taken out earlier, which gives you a bit of a glimpse of why these behavioral, psychological studies are important for doing better in terms of the economy, and I'll give you 3 brief examples. The first one is to do with context matters. Our psychology picks up on surrounding things in a picture. You've seen this kind of thing in many places. I never know whether on a PowerPoint this will show up. Let me try. I will come back to this. I can't believe this, the way it is showing up so strikingly. You'll have to go to the World Development Report and see if this happens. Do you see an A marked and a B marked? These two are actually exactly the same shade. The psychology refuses to allow for that. If you blocked out everything around them and just through a hole saw the A and saw the B, they are the same. But your mind will pick up, first of all, you know what a chessboard is, which one is black, which one is white. You will pick out from the surrounding colors, and you will see them as different shades. The mind does that. Our mind picks up things from surrounding features, and there are very famous artists who have used that to create delusions. M.C. Escher's art, if you know. Escher was a master of deluding you by putting up a whole picture. There are other artists who have done that. Number 2, organ donation. You see this dramatic difference between a cluster of countries. In the event of death, will you give your organ? Will you giving the state the right to come and take away your kidney or different parts of your organ and donate? One striking difference is between two neighboring countries, Germany and Austria. In Austria, 99.98% of people give their organs, and in Germany, it is 12%. But we know the reason for this is not that there's a huge cultural difference between the two groups. In Austria, if you say nothing, you are an organ donor. In Germany, if you say nothing, you are an organ keeper. So you have to explicitly, in a form, there's a default option, and if you want to do the other, you have to do a tick. A tick takes no time, but still it makes a huge difference to what you do. This we know from a variety of tests now, and I know this very painfully because I'm very careless about choosing. So if something comes with a default choice, I'll go for the default choice. I don't like to spend too much time thinking and agonizing, and people do that. Retirement money, when you join an organization, depending on, if you say nothing, your retirement money will be handled in a particular fashion. If you want it handled in a different way, you have to just fill up a quick form. Vast number of people go with the default option, which means it's not the choice between A and B. How you give people the choice between A and B will make them choose in one particular way rather than in another way. And we know this from educational choice for children in poor areas. How you tell the parents whether to send the children to school or not, it makes a very big difference. The interaction, the nature of interaction with people makes a difference to their choice. There are some actually very sharp examples from around. I have one fieldwork experience years ago. I did some field studies in India, in Jharkhand village, not a serious field study. I went thrice to this rural area with large groups of people who were serious empirical workers. I used to go with them to hang around, chat with villagers. The first time we went and started talking to the villagers, we had come from Delhi. It was very difficult to get any answers from them. Then we were told to use one technique. Get an educated person in the village with whom we could interact properly, persuade that person and have that person who the villagers know come with you, and that begins to make a huge difference to people's reaction to you. You know, we've had other experiences in very practical areas. Polio vaccination in some countries, especially Muslim areas, taking polio vaccination is very difficult. You take the polio vaccination and people begin to worry that it is something being brought in. In some parts of Pakistan, you've had this. You've had in some parts of Afghanistan. People will run away thinking that these are people who have come from United States with some kind of a strange vaccine which will harm you in some way. What do you do about this? First of all, I would in America point out that you can't shrug this off totally as irrational. Do a reverse experiment and you will understand that it's not totally irrational. These people don't know your country at all. You are coming from America with this vaccine, people will react. And the example I would give is, if in North Korea they developed a vaccine and took it to small villages in the United States to give this vaccine to people to be healthier because Kim Jong-un had developed a new vaccine, I can assure you people would be running far from that vaccine. There are these cultural suspicions which are huge, and now it has been discovered that to take these vaccines to these areas, you have to first get to the educated religious leaders in that area, sit down with them. If you can persuade them, then go with them, it just transforms people's reaction to this. So these are just little experiments from the field that you have to get used to and begin to use. This is a well-cited paper. We talk about it in the World Development Report. In Kenya, this experiment was done. Habiara Mana and Jack published this paper. In buses in Kenya, if you put up this sign, saying that don't just sit there as he drives dangerously. Stand up, speak up now, tells ordinary people to do that. Just putting up the sticker caused accidents to go down by 50%. Very well-controlled study. It empowers people to see this, and people actually stand up. Maybe drivers, knowing that some people may stand up, also begin to drive carefully, and it makes a big difference to this. The World Development Report is full of studies of this kind. You can pick up the report. You will get a whole lot of different examples. I have one problem, leaving it at that. Behavioral economics, and if I were to make one criticism, the criticism is that too much of it takes the form of catalog of findings, one after another. You go to a village, you go to a remote area, do an experiment. There are games which have been played recently, I'm forgetting which country, somewhere in sub-Saharan Africa, that in a game you can give away some money, donate some money. If in the room, if you have a white man standing and then ask people how much money you'll give to charity, the charity amount goes up a little bit. You give a little bit more. Yes, interesting result, important result, but I can tell you, I can suggest variants where this will begin to have a difference. If the white person is made to stand in a suit and tie, it can have one effect. If it's in swimming trunk, it can have another effect. So you can think of lots of variants. You can do lots of experiments. Many of those are extremely important. You've made important findings, but it can also become a catalog of one study after another. You have to pause and ask yourself, what do you do with this? Like this particular study, which I've seen it, so I know that this is a very well-controlled study, you believe in it. But would this technique work all the time? I don't think so. Because as you put more and more labels instructing people to do things, people gradually internalize it and don't react to that. I remember this from my early days in Delhi, when I began teaching at the Delhi School of Economics, and I used to take these very rough buses, public buses in Delhi to go from my home to Delhi School of Economics to teach. In these buses, there were some seats where there would be signs saying, ladies' seat, only women can sit on them. Well, don't ask me whether it's good or bad, but it said ladies' seat, meant only for women. In India, it had become customary that people ignored it. Ladies' seat, you go and sit down over there, and women come, you continue to be there. After some time, Delhi buses developed another technique. Above those signs saying ladies' seat, they put up another sign saying, please allow ladies to sit on ladies' seat. It worked for a short while, again it broke down. People got used to that. So these kinds of techniques, you have to begin to theorize with it a little bit. And I'm going to give you, this is a prelude to what I'm going to do. I'm going to take you through a little bit of theorizing on how to take some of these ideas further forward to use them in different domains of life. There are two exercises I want to do, depending on how I'm doing for time. I'm going to take you through, let me take you through one example carefully, and I'll decide on the other one how I do it. These norms, social norms, psychological predilections, interact with economics in one interesting way. One line that is taken by Akerlof and Schiller in their book, which I have a great sympathy for. I do believe that some of the central propositions of economics, central methods of economics are very useful. I do like economics' use of the idea of equilibrium. Different kinds of equilibrium, but still the idea of equilibrium, I think, is a very important contribution. But the ingredients through which you get to the equilibrium, those mainstream economics, neoclassical economics has been very weak. Assuming every individual is rational or every household is perfectly rational, and then working with that leads you to mistakes. One work is the collective household model, where François has done a lot of work. If you make a realistic assumption that the household is not one rational unit, but break it down to the fact that within the household, there can be tussles between the husband and the wife, or the partners, or between the parents and the children, and allow for diversity of preference within the household and a bit of a tussle within the household. Amartya Sen had a term for this, calling it the cooperative conflict, that households are meant to be cooperative, but there is also conflict within the household. If you recognize that, still use the concept of equilibrium in the market, you'll get very different results from that. And there's a lot of work. That work took place in Paris. François and his co-authors, a lot of that work has been extremely influential. Likewise, the way I would like to use behavioral economics and social norms is to use the concept of equilibrium from economics, but mix it with bringing in elements of norms. So the first example I want to give to you is there are two ways in which you can bring social norms into the picture. One is where you don't have to go very far from mainstream economics, but you have to allow for norms to play a role in equilibrium selection. What do I mean by this? I can give you a very, very simple example. Driving on the left or driving on the right side of the road, you typically don't need police people to run after and catch you. Because once that norm gets into place, it is so much in your self-interest to do that. Best example of that is in Indian villages, where effectively there is no law about which side of the road you drive on. But by and large, there are violations. So if you go to India, please don't take this to be the last word. Be always careful about a car coming towards you. But by and large, even in villages, the rule of the cities have come in. People drive on the left. Yes, occasionally you, to get an advantage, you drive right, but you generally stay on the left. This is a norm that is self-fulfilling. I did some work, and this is what I want to very quickly take you through. Don't read it just now, but I'll tell you a little bit of what this is. I did this work with a co-author, Jürgen Weibel, on punctuality, where we argue that norms play a very, very big role. This was, for me, a very interesting project when we began working on this. He comes from a culture which is known for its punctuality, Sweden. I come from a culture which is known for less for its punctuality, much less, from India. We began working together on this, and we were surveying a lot of the literature of punctuality norms across societies. And there are huge differences, as you would expect. Japan is a very punctual society, probably the most punctual society. Latin America is much less punctual, and North America is more punctual. There is one very beautiful study. I think it is by Levine, but I read a lot of literature that time by social psychologists. This study these are all non-economist studies. One was, in the olden days when you didn't have iPhones, people's watches, are they well coordinated or not? There was a study done of Brazil and North America, United States. And it was discovered that in the United States, watches are better coordinated. When it is 8 o'clock, it's virtually 8 o'clock for everyone. Whereas in Brazil, someone will say 10 minutes to 8, someone will say 10 past 8, there's a variation. When we were doing this study, I wanted to find out Indian watches, whether they are well coordinated or not. Looked for a lot of data, but I could not find data. But I had an experience which to me shows the power of anthropology. The way people use language can very often give you insights into lots of data. While we were doing this research, I had gone to India, and at Delhi airport, when I arrived, a man walked up to me and asked me the time, using a sentence construction which is very common in India, but I suddenly became alerted to this because I was doing this research on punctuality. He came up to me and said, "Excuse me, sir, can you tell me the time by your watch?" The watch dependence, the fact that you expect time to be dependent on your watch on another person's watch, is a part of, it's a very standard way in which you ask for time in India. It's a polite way that I'm not asking you for the time, but by your watch, which shows that probably there is a variation over there. We reached the conclusion, Jürgen Weibel and I, after spending a lot of time, that yes, these things of course get habit forming a little bit, but it is also a reaction to the society you're living in, and you adapt a certain kind of norm very quickly. I'll give you two examples. One is, I'm not carrying this with me. Later on, a Japanese sociologist gave me this document. I wish I had it. It's remarkable. This is about 100 years ago. Europeans talking about the utter lack of sense of time in Japan. If I read out that paragraph to you, you wouldn't believe it's describing Japan, because Japan, as you know, is a hyper-punctual society. But Japan was an extremely unpunctual society. It changed somewhere. There are studies on Korea about Korean laziness, how Koreans are among the laziest people from 1950s. Koreans are now among the most hardworking people. So these changes take place, and we developed a little bit of an explanation of punctuality and why it could be that punctuality can be a bit of a norm. And here is what I'm remembering, an example. Arthur Lewis, I went to see him in Princeton once. This was in 1986. He was already a very, very old person. He was a Nobel laureate, as you know. He was Black American Nobel laureate, Black English to start with, then American. This is important in the story. I went to see Arthur Lewis, Nobel laureate, very famous. I went well in time, waited outside. When I entered his room, Arthur Lewis, very gentle old man, he said, you know, you Indians are so punctual. And I fell back. I thought, you know, he's old, maybe he's began confusing Indians with Japanese, or there's something going on over here. He said, however, blacks in America are not punctual, the way you Indians are punctual. But I realized what's happened. He's talking about Silicon Valley Indians who have migrated and very quickly adapted to the norms over there. They did not have cultural roots to the country they've come to. They've adapted to the norms over there. And this was the basis of our model, that it is worthwhile behaving the way other people behave in a society. And the model is a very easy model. I'll very quickly run you through this. Being unpunctual does not mean being habitually late by 15 minutes. If it is, then we don't treat that as unpunctual. You're using language differently. Unpunctual is when you are planning an 8 o'clock meeting, you can show up at 8 or you can show up 15 minutes after 8. A punctual person will show up at 8, an unpunctual person will show up at 8 or 15 minutes after 8. And make two simple assumptions, and you'll get this model going very, very easily. Till both of you are there, the meeting cannot start. And if the meeting starts on time, both of you get a benefit of B. That B is the benefit of the meeting starting on time. And to be punctual, to be sure that you're there at 8 o'clock, you have to incur a cost. You have to get up earlier, close the book that you are reading, and that cost to you individually is C. And now, it's just one picture and the whole model is told with this. If self, you're the self and that's the other person. And these are all the returns to the self. If you choose to be punctual, P for punctual, and the other person is also punctual, both of you are punctual, the meeting will start at 8. Because if both of you are punctual, you're going to both show up at 8. So you get the benefit of starting at 8 o'clock, which is B. But you incur the cost of being punctual, which is C. So it is B minus C. Do you get it? That's the payoff to you. If you are unpunctual and the other person is punctual, the meeting starting at 8 has a probability P. Because you are unpunctual, you only have a probability of being there. So the benefit is PB, and that's the benefit you're getting because you don't incur a cost, and you can fill in those two others. The last one is if both of you are unpunctual, the probability of the meeting starting at 8 is P squared. Both of you have to be there, multiplied by B. It is very easy to show that in this model, you can get into an equilibrium where if the other person is unpunctual, it's not worthwhile for you to be punctual. Whereas if the other person is punctual, it is worthwhile for you to be punctual. And our entire paper is much more general than this, argues that if in a society, the unpunctuality norm has set in, you are not expecting others to be punctual, it's in your self-interest not to be punctual. Whereas in a society where the punctuality norm has set in, if you're expecting others to be punctual, you will be punctual as well. And so you can get into a punctuality trap, or you can get into an unpunctuality behavior trap, both of you, and society gets caught in these behaviors. There is nothing fundamentally different between India and Sweden. There is nothing fundamentally different between Brazil and United States. It is that you are caught in a normative trap. Entire society is in that trap, and you're caught over there. To recognize this gives you a way to break away and do better out of that. These things can be taken in certain directions. One, which was a letter that Albert Hirschman wrote to me when I was doing this, because François mentioned my child labor work, I remembered. When I was doing my work on child labor, I had put forward an argument that taking a supercilious attitude to countries where there is a lot of child labor, that these are people are being wicked and lazy and sending their children out to work, is wrong. There is something about child labor which is a bit of a trap. When lots of people send their children out to work, wages become of the kind and societal situation becomes of the kind where it is for poor parents, it's worthwhile for you to send your children out. The parents may be morally no different from parents in a rich country. If you view society in this manner, then when you see child labor, you don't take a moral supercilious stand. You think of ways in which you want to change this behavior. Albert Hirschman wrote me in the days when I was involved in this debate on child labor, and I wrote an article in the New York Times criticizing American policy on child labor that time, which was to take a legislative action against countries where child labor is high and come down hammering saying ban child labor from tomorrow. I personally felt if you suddenly ban child labor, you will probably cause child starvation because these are usually very poor parents who are sending their children out to work. So you need a whole lot of complementary policies with this. Hirschman's point, which I now, when I look back, is very similar to the argument that I presented over here. Hirschman wrote a handwritten long letter saying that into your argument, you have to also bring in social norms. And I do believe that is important. How bad is child labor is also a bit of a norm. If you're seeing everyone else, all your neighbors sending your children out to work, a certain norm sets in. This is not that there is anything fundamentally different in what you do, but it is a norm that sets in and you behave in a particular manner by that. So when a country gets into a normative trap, you have to think of policies not in terms of changing the tax rate and changing something, but intervening in terms of the norms and trying to change those norms. Some norms which have changed and give me a huge surprise, and we don't fully understand how that happened. You know, not smoking cigarettes in a public place. When this norm first arrived, I remember I would go back and forth with the United States. In the US, it was a law and soon it became a norm. People would not light up cigarettes in public places. I used to think in those days that India is such an anarchic society. In India, this norm will never come in. But actually it has come in. In India, in public places, in big auditoriums, whether or not there is a sign saying you're not allowed to smoke, and this law is never really enforced, people don't light up cigarettes anymore. The norm has changed. How has it changed? I don't know. But in the olden days, I know that economists used to take the view that norms are unimportant. Social norms are just little cultural things which have nothing to do with economy, life, and well-being. But now we know that norms are extremely important, and human beings are not fundamentally different. They react to norms, the norms changes. At least now there are studies taking place of these norms.